Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I go by Hiram or Bogwa. Hey guys, welcome to another tutorial. So today we'll be looking into methods and arguments. The one method that we've covered so far has been the main method, and as we know, it's the entry point of all Java applications. There are four main components in the definition of the method. One, the accessors. So the public and static are what are considered accessors, and they define how we can access this method, how we can go about calling this method. Those will be covered later in a different video. And then we have the return type. In the main method, we have void, so that means this method does not return a thing. And then we have the name of the method, which in this case, it's main, and then the arguments of the method. So these are the inputs of the method. So today we will be defining our own methods. One to print out this countries list using a for loop, and the other one to print out this countries list using a while loop. But before we define those methods, we're going to grab the user's input in order to determine how we should go about printing this countries list, either with the while loop or with the for loop. So let's go ahead and grab that user's input. So the first thing we're going to define is the scanner. Again, we import the scanner through java.util.scanner. That's part of the Java libraries that we can utilize to read the user's input. So let's first execute this program. Now here what we're doing is we're printing out some statements to inform the user of the inputs that they should give us. And then after that, we read the user's input. And right now, we're just going to go ahead and print out that user's input. Now note, I'm using a do while loop statement. So the user will be able to run this code block multiple times until they enter exit or E. Let's add that. On this logic, what we're saying is do this as long as the choice does not equal exit and the choice does not equals E. Note the not operation. And with that, we'll go ahead and execute it and test it out first. I forgot a semicolon. It's key to remember your semicolons. So here the user is provided with the options. So let's try F. It continues. W. It continues. E. We exit. Let's try that again. This time let's type exit. It's gonna exit. Okay, now as I stated, the purpose of this program is to print out the list of countries that we've defined here using either a for loop or a while loop based on the user's input. Now what we're going to do is define two new methods, one for printing by for loop and another one for printing by while loop. Both of those methods should take in an argument of type string array, and that's going to be the countries whenever we pass them down, and print out all elements in that list. One thing to note is you cannot define a method within a method. So this method cannot be defined inside the main method. We have to define it outside of that, but within the class. So here we've defined the print by for loop, and now we'll define the print by while loop. So now let's first compare these two methods. As we can see, they both have the same type of structure. Let's make this a string, not string. They're both taking in the same argument, but they work differently. One important thing to note about the static accessor is that you can only access a static method within a static method. That means you can define a method like this. This is a valid definition of a method, but I will not be able to call this method within the main method since it's not static. And I'll cover static a little bit more down the road, but that's just something important to keep in the back of your mind. I call this one print by for loop, and then I call this other one print by while loop. Your method name should always be descriptive of what the method does. I should be able to read this method name and be able to know like what it does, or have a general idea of what the method does without digging too much into it. So I can't just call this method whatever I want. That's not good programming standards. That's the same thing that goes to variable inputs. I call this choice because it represents the choice that the user has entered. Now I could even call the user's choice to be even more descriptive, but that's something important to keep in the back of your mind. Whenever you're writing the code, you want to use descriptive names. I'll just go compile it to make sure everything is fine. We want to decide based on this user's choice, should I print by for loop or should I print by while loop? Now next, I'm going to create a generic method that will help us determine which print method we should utilize. I'll go ahead and get started. And then I'm going to show you how I'm going to utilize this method. Let me rename this variable. Okay, let's take a moment and read this code and understand what's going on. So I've created this generic method that I'm calling isValidChoice. Now again, I did not have to do this, but I just want to show you how methods work and how to define different types of methods. Now as you can see, the main difference between isValidChoice method and the print by for loop and while loop method is we don't have a void return type. Here we've actually defined a return type of Boolean. So that means this method should have a return statement. And this is how we define a return statement in a method. It's return and then that value. Now, if you remember, whenever we run the dot equals ignore case on a string, that returns a Boolean. So what's going to happen is we're going to call the dot equals ignore case method for that string, and that's going to return a Boolean, and then we're going to return that Boolean for our method. Now how we're going to utilize this method is we're going to check for the first case does that user input equal F? In that instance, if it does, we're going to print using the for loop. Next, we're going to check if that user's input equals W. If that's the case, then we're going to print utilizing the while loop. The next statement here, you have to read it slowly and understand what's going on here. So we're saying is, if the user's input does not equals E and it does not equals exit, then that's an invalid input. The important thing to keep in mind is that if the user enters F or W, it will never hit this condition, right? Because it's going to execute here or it's going to execute here. So here we're only checking to make sure we don't print out this statement if the user is trying to exit. So if the user is trying to exit, we don't want to tell them that they've entered an invalid choice, since that's a valid choice. So if the user enters K, P, or whatever, we want to let them know that, hey, that was an invalid choice, try again, and the loop will come back here and request for their inputs again. Now, the only way the user will be able to exit this program is if they give us the input of exit or E. So with that, let's go ahead and compile it and test it for ourselves. So I'll put F, printing by for loop. Now I'll put W, printing by while loop, right? And I'll put E to exit. Let's try that again. This time I'll type exit to exit. Let's run it again. This time I'll type H. Again, it's going to prompt the user for the input. So let's try K. It's going to prompt the user for input again until they've entered a valid input. F, prints by for loop. E, exit. Now, as you can see, one of the benefits of utilizing method is I can call this anywhere within my code and it will do the same thing irregardless. The only thing that will change will be the inputs that I'm giving to the method, but the method will do the exact same thing that it always does. So the beauty of methods is they allow us to have reusable code. As you can see in how I utilize the is valid choice, I'm able to call that 1, 2, 3, 4 times, but each time I'm calling it with different inputs, but it's doing the same functionality. Those are the basics of methods. So you have your accessors, and then you have your return type, and then you have your method name, and then you have your method arguments. Now, since I've defined 2 method arguments here, this method is expecting for there to be 2 arguments that are passed down to it. Or you can call them 2 parameters. So I can't execute this with just 1 parameter. I need to pass both, as it expects for there to have 2 arguments. We'll learn more about methods as we progress, but that's the basics of it that you really need to understand. Thank you for watching my tutorials. Give it a thumbs up if you like it, and subscribe if you haven't, and also check me out on Instagram at coderush.io.